Given Australia's lack of nuclear infrastructure, analyze Canberra's decision to opt for nuclear-powered submarines instead of diesel-electric submarines. Nuclear submarines offer a range of operational advantages, but mainly they can be deployed without surfacing for a much longer period than diesel submarines. The limits on nuclear submarines' submerged operations are based only on how much food they can carry, and how long a navy can ask its crews to serve on board. On the other hand, they are much more expensive to develop and build, and they need specialist workforces to build, operate, and support them. The precise balance of factors pushing Australia to move to nuclear submarines is not visible from outside the highest levels of its government. Dissatisfaction with the rate of advance with the French submarines, acceptance by the Australian Navy of the advantages of being to deploy a submarine or even two closer to China, realization that even longer-range diesel submarine could not enable this, and confirmation that the US and the UK would be willing to cooperate all must have played some part. The UK Astute submarine or US Virginia-class submarine is most conducive to Australia's capabilities. If submarines could be bought from an operating production line, the Astute would be less expensive and more than adequately capable. However, the production of the Astute is coming to an end and elements of its supply chain may already be unavailable. Neither the US nor the UK submarine sector has the capacity for exports, so some capacity to help Australia must be found. As the governments move into the detail of implementation arrangements, there will be difficult issues of precisely which technology and knowledge the UK and the US will transfer. It is possible that the US may want Australia to have a variant of the Los Angeles-class boat rather than its eventual replacement, the Virginia-class. Additionally, given Australia's previous difficulties in generating submarine crews, the smaller crew needed for the Astute, at about 3/4 of that linked to the Virginia-class, might well enhance the appeal of a UK-origin boat. Australia, like many others, seeks to secure employment benefits from its defence programs, but the scale of these would be much affected by how quickly it wants its new boats to be ready for service. As a rough rule, the more work on the submarine's construction it wants done in Australia, the longer delivery will take. In the long run, if Australia ever opted to pursue civil nuclear power generation, it would have a much larger base of expertise from which to proceed. This may appear as a significant enhancement, since neither Australia's Hobart destroyers nor its Hunter-class vessels under construction has been equipped with missiles with the range to attack land targets in China. The latest Tomahawks have a range in excess of 1,000 miles. However, their use would also require extensive targeting intelligence, and it is hard to envisage their being fired except in a coalition context. Identify key challenges and choices facing Canberra in negotiations with Washington and London during the next 18 months of Aukus planning. The agenda will be long and complicated. In basic terms, Australia will have to decide what it wants most and when. Regardless of the proportion of the boats to be built in Australia, the right infrastructure must have been built for their arrival, along with a nuclear regulatory regime under which they will operate. Canberra will need to agree to education and training matters with its two partners. It would clearly be beneficial if Australian personnel could be trained and serve as crew on UK and/or US submarines over several years. Australian submarines will need a national commander, but the training and prior multi-role experience needed for such a role take years to acquire. In summary, the key challenges will be political, reconciling Australian expectations with what its partners will be willing to provide, and financial, finding the funding over a sustained period for all that needs to be done. The money task list includes the cost of reaching a settlement with the French naval group. The announcement of the Australia-UK-US Aukus Agreement for Cooperation on Australian Acquisition of Nuclear-Powered Submarines (SSNs), as well as closer cooperation between the three allies on artificial intelligence, cyber, quantum, underwater systems, and long-range strike capabilities, has generated an enormous amount of overheated commentary. For some, this agreement is something of a magical unicorn that will deliver all manner of strategic and security blessings onto Australia. Rory Medalf proclaimed that this new triple-near alliance is based on capability, convergent interest and, above all, trust, and will deliver a merger of our military, industrial and scientific capabilities. These are bold claims. Yet, for the submarine component of the agreement, at least, there remain a number of significant unanswered questions. What does this mean for Australia's already strained submarine capability? For Australia's capacity to establish the necessary infrastructure and technical know-how to build and maintain a fleet of SSNs? And is this acquisition aligned with a coherent strategy for the submarine's use? There is no doubt that the agreement constitutes a major shift in Australian policy. Most immediately, it presents an ignominious end to Canberra's troubled $90 billion submarine deal with French-owned naval group for 12 diesel-electric-powered short-fin Barracuda, based on the French Suffren-class submarines, and the beginning of a complex and potentially prolonged process to acquire 8 nuclear-powered submarines, SSN, either of the U.S. Virginia-class or UK Astute-class. The operational reasons for this switch are straightforward. SSNs will provide greater range and can stay at sea for longer, and will therefore transform the ability of the Australian Defence Force to operate at range around Australia and beyond. In a strategic context, SSN acquisition in cooperation with the United States and United Kingdom will also provide the Royal Australian Navy, or RAN, with greater interoperability with both partners and redress what Prime Minister Scott Morrison termed the narrowing of the technological edge enjoyed by Australia and our partners in Asia. The government's rhetoric of urgency here, however, is somewhat belied by the realities of how long it will take to acquire the new submarines. Not only will the Aukus partners engage in an intensive 18-month consultation to determine whether the British or American submarine is the best option, along with workforce, shipyard and training needs, but it is likely, as Morrison has himself noted, that construction would begin within the decade and the first submarines would be in the water before the end of next decade, the 2030s. The scrapping of the short-fin Barracudas, which were forecast to be operational by 2035, and their replacement with SSNs of as yet unknown design, means that Australia will engage in another life extension of the 6 remaining Collins-class submarines, which are now due to be withdrawn from service in 2036. This, as Hugh White notes, combined with the likely long period it will take to either acquire an off-the-shelf SSN from Australia's Aukus partners or to build them in Australia, as is the Morrison government's preferred option, means that there is likely to be a serious drop in capability in the 2030s as the Collins are withdrawn before the new SSNs become operational. The government's somewhat unconvincing response to this question is that Australia may look to lease SSNs from its Aukus partners as a stopgap solution. However, if, as Morrison has claimed before, Australia lives in a time of great uncertainty not seen since the 1930s, one would have presumed that such contingencies would not have been an afterthought. The costs too of this acquisition are not known, but it will be substantially more than the $90 billion that had been committed to the now scrapped short-fin Barracuda. The Congressional Research Service assessed it costs approximately $4.73 billion Australian dollars, or $3.45 billion US dollars, to procure a Virginia-class submarine, but the Morrison government's determination to build them in Australia and to develop all the overheads involved in operating nuclear-powered submarines safely and responsibly will likely blow out that figure substantially. The prospective Aukus SSNs therefore come without any estimated cost, except they'll be more expensive than the French ones, precise timetable, except they won't be available for a couple of decades, or firm indication of how much building will be done in Australia, except that it won't be all of it and possibly only a modest amount.